It's time, Fort Wayne. Your sports, your station. It's the Sports Rush with Brett Rump.
Max Landis.
Covering all the topics that hit a nerve here in the Summit City.
Clark goes 11 yards, touchdown.
Only on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Now here's your host, Brett Rump.
The greatest, most interesting, most important person of all time.
You are incredible! Over the point. Yeah, well, you're half right. What is this, amateur hour?
This is going to be huge. I believe this is going to be our final show. One friend and friends smaller.
Just when I think you've said the stupidest thing ever, you keep talking.
I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That boy ain't right.
The simplest way to put it, I have problems.
Welcome to the alleged show.
Could be talking about the weather, just how good it is looking on this hump day. It is the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, 4 to 6. I am Brett Rump along with Adam Lundy. We've got you connected on our Parkview Sports Medicine text line at 260-447-8500. I'll tell you, this is an exciting week. There's so many great things happening in the world of sports as we flip the calendar from January to February. It's hard to believe January just flew by.
Yeah, I don't know where it went. It's gone.
I think we were kind of numb to it because we were all frozen stiff with all the cold temperatures. It seemed like January was nothing but like single digits the entire month. That's kind of what I think of the past month is it's been cold. And so it's an exciting week because we're looking at forecasts in the 50s for highs. Man, got some sunshine. Everybody feels better. They're all in a better mood when you got the sun shining down, the blue skies up above, and then you've got some exciting sports to kind of top it off with coming up tonight. Got women's basketball for Purdue Fort Wayne. They're on the road at Youngstown State. Tomorrow night, it is time to support the Fort. And that will be at the Coliseum tomorrow night at 9:05 will be the official tip time. It is a sliding tip time, which means if the game that's broadcast on ESPNU just ahead of the Mastodons in Cleveland State, if it runs long, then the Mastodons could have their tip time pushed a little bit by the network. They will be pretty much running everything tomorrow night. But at the Coliseum, hope to see you there. I don't know, Adam. Still thinking.
Oh, you're debating.
You know what I'm thinking about. Our listeners, some of them are going to know what I'm thinking about. But I'm just like, by now, if you wanted to go and you were willing to go, you've already got your tickets. I don't need to be trying to scavenge up some. Is that right, scavenge?
Yeah, it's a good word.
Scavenge up some tickets. But we've been giving away tickets the last couple of days and giving you a chance to get in to see the Dons in Cleveland State. But the ticket prices are only $10. There's still plenty of tickets. I looked at the seating chart to see what was available. Right now, you've got a few rows, here and there for the lower level of the arena. That's the lower section. I don't know how to describe it now because it used to be lower and upper arena. And that was always how we described it. Lower from the concourse down was lower arena. From the concourse up was upper arena. Right,
yeah.
So going by the old seating of the Coliseum with that upper-lower analogy or upper-lower description, the lower section has limited availability. I mean, you're down to probably 15% or 20% of the total seats available. The upper bowl probably has 90% still open. So if you're looking for upper arena in the old seating chart for the Coliseum, plenty of seats there.
And still great seats. I mean, it's not like you're going to be super far from the action just because you're in the quote-unquote upper.
People buy balcony seats to go to Indiana basketball. And, of course, I always wonder, why do you drive 3 hours to not see a game?
Right.
When you could actually just stay at home and watch it on television. Is the atmosphere really? I mean, I understand like the bleachers at Wrigley Field.
Yeah, that's fun.
That's an experience.
Sure.
I don't know that the balcony, because to me, I would be frozen in fear because of the height and how steep it is.
It is steep. Plus, you get up high.
I think somebody said it's like watching a game on a cliff.
Yeah.
And it kind of is.
You get up high, you kind of get the ceiling in the way. I mean, it's interesting there.
I think you could be upper arena at the Coliseum, and it would be about midway up the lower section of Assembly Hall.
Yeah.
That's kind of the middle portion, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
In fact, it might even be the lower half of Assembly Hall. I mean, it's still, even though you're in the upper arena of the Coliseum, you probably still have better seats than a lot of the what would be considered good seats at Assembly Hall. But a game that it would have been for first place, but of course the Mastodons lost at Oakland, and all Cleveland State's done is win. They've won 12 straight games, second longest winning streak in the country, and that game tomorrow night at 9:05. Coming up on the show, we've got to talk to Scott Agness, because now it's here. We did not understand a lot of the calendar or the logistics and rules of the WNBA. All of a sudden, the Fever became relevant, and we didn't really know what's the salary cap. Is there a salary cap? What's the Fever's position in the salary cap? Will they make trades? Will they have free agency? We didn't know.
No.
We'd never been there and never paid attention, but all of a sudden it became relevant with Caitlin Clark. And we just got big news from the Fever today.
We did. Do I get the button ready?
No, we'll talk about it here in a minute. You can have the button ready, but it'll be a couple minutes. We'll talk about it, because I want to kind of lead into Scott Agness with that breaking news.
I like that.
Dylan Sinn is going to join us.
Yeah, he was supposed to join us yesterday.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for those listening, you know that we had a little bit of a technical difficulty.
Yeah, and we got through it.
We did.
We got through it. We had the silent commercial break.
I'm sure a lot of people probably liked that.
Thought that's a different way of doing it.
Yeah, just completely cut off anything from...
like, if you ever watch a live stream where they like ESPN Plus.
Yeah, it just goes...
Sometimes they have commercials, but there are no commercials, so it just goes to a graphic.
It's the audio version of that.
That says basically commercial break, we'll return in a moment.
Yeah.
We just didn't have a graphic, but that's basically what we were doing. We were just testing to see how long you would stick with us when we put nothing on the air.
Yeah, so we were able to get back on air. Unfortunately, didn't have enough time to get Dylan on in that first hour, so we're going to have him on today.
Yep, we will talk to Dylan Sinn about the Hoosiers, Mike Woodson, and the game coming up Friday night with Indiana and Purdue. Also, hour number 2. Wait a minute, this must be a typo. This has to be a typo.
It's not. Your former producer,
D.C. Hendricks, who is now the producer for Jim Shevlin at Talkin' Sports every Saturday morning. He is a big-time writer for the WWE.
Yeah, he is.
And I don't know exactly who it is he works for, but he covers the WWE, and he's taken it on as kind of a passion over the last few years, and he's done a terrific job covering the sport. And the WWE is coming for one of their marquee events at Lucas Oil Stadium. Comes up this weekend. It's the Royal Rumble. I was supposed to have an echo there. Can you give me the echo?
I don't have an echo button.
We don't have an echo?
No.
Oh, because I was wanting to say Royal Rumble.
That's the best I got, buddy.
If someday we could just have a budget.
Oh, goodness.
260-447-8500, the Parkview Sports Medicine text line. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, 260-447-8500. It's back to the United States for the Indiana Pacers. They return from their trip to Paris, and hopefully they don't have jet lag or jet legs or whatever. Is it worse going to Europe? I've heard people debate this, and I never really know what side, because I've never made the trip across the pond. Is it worse going to or coming back when you go to Paris, when you go to Europe?
Yeah. When you go from America to Europe, you lose time. And then when you come back, you gain the time.
Right.
So I don't know which one makes it worse in regards to jet lag.
Yeah, and I don't know when it hits.
I don't know either.
Sometimes it's like a day later when it catches up with you. But the Pacers, hopefully, they're back to form after having they came back late Saturday night.
Yeah.
Or early Sunday. So they've had like 3 days to prepare for the Detroit Pistons, and that's the opponent tonight. It's actually a pretty big game. At the the Coliseum at Gainbridge Fieldhouse.
Yes, sir.
Everything's at the Coliseum now.
It should be.
Yeah, it should be. Now the Pacers really should play at least one game.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I thought that when they stripped us of the Mad Ants, that a consolation would be, number one, I was hoping they would schedule a regular season game for the Coliseum. They used to do that.
That'd be great.
And it was like when I was a kid, so at this point it's been decades ago. But if not that, they should at least commit one preseason game will always be played in Fort Wayne. Because I guarantee you, if they look at their mailing list or whatever of tickets that are purchased, I almost can guarantee you that outside of the Marion County and every surrounding county area right there in central Indiana, that the Fort Wayne market's got to be the second best market for tickets.
You have to think so.
And yet they take the G League team away. They don't offer anything as a consolation, so we don't get a preseason game. They did it one time, but that was when the Mad Ants were still here.
Right. I know people weren't super high on the Mad Ants, but it's still hard not to miss some professional basketball here at Fort Wayne.
And since the Pacers missed the opportunity to suck up to Fort Wayne in the fall and didn't schedule a preseason Pacers game, we'll go ahead and let it pass as long as you schedule a Caitlin Clark game at Allen County War Memorial Coliseum. That'll be okay. We'll go ahead and just take the women's game instead.
Yeah, come on, Fever. Come on up north here.
Yeah, come on up. And in fact, Kelsey Mitchell is coming back to the Indiana Fever. News announced today that the Indiana Fever are using their core designation. Now, I don't have any idea what that is, but I did hear over the last few days that Kelsey Mitchell's a free agent, but it's expected that the Pacers are going to use, and in some ways it's it's when you have the franchise tag that you use in the NFL where you tag a player.
Yeah.
I think it's very similar to that.
Is it like in the MLB when they come on a one-year deal to avoid arbitration, or is it more similar to the
It's
NFL?
like a franchise. I think it's you designate. I don't think the player has a whole lot of say, yay or nay. I think that it's a 1 year, and basically what it says is this player is part of our core group. We need them to be competitive, and somehow you qualify to be a part of eligible for the core designation, and the Pacers or the Fever used it, and so Kelsey Mitchell will return. So the trio of Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and what's her name?
It starts with a C. There might be another C in there somewhere.
Caitlin Clark. Yeah, that's it. They're going to be back in Indianapolis together this coming summer. Now, the question is, what will the Fever do around that trio? Because I think you've got a lot of expendable parts, and we know Alyssa Smith, that she's gone.
She gone.
And then, you look at the roster and you think, what do you do with Erica Wheeler? I think she's gone. But that leaves you some roster spots. It also leaves you some money.
Yes, it does.
And I'm trying to basically determine at this point, what is the salary cap for the WNBA and how much money does the Fever have and how aggressive can they be? Because the other thing is you not only have the overall salary cap, but in the WNBA, you've got maximum salary. And so you have to look at the numbers of what you're allowed to pay to an individual player. And whether or not you're going to give them the cap. Now, I still look at Breanna Stewart, and I think she's kind of the type of player that Indiana could really use a stretch for. Lexi Hull does a great job, and I think she's a wonderful backup to that position. And I think she's versatile enough that she could probably get some minutes at the 3 because she's a pretty good defender on anybody from a 2 to a 4. And so I'd like to see Lexi Hull back, but I think Breanna Stewart should be the starter. That's where the Fever have an opportunity to improve, and I don't know her status as far as can they use the core designation on her in New York to keep her with the Liberty after winning the championship. This is where we're going to find out what players want to get that opportunity to play with Caitlin Clark after watching what she does and how she makes teammates better and the type of basketball with the fast pace and pushing it up the floor and getting your teammates open and being willing to distribute it to them, I would think she'd be a player that most players like a Breanna Stewart would want to play with. And the reason is she just won a championship. She's played with some pretty, talented scorers. But this would give her a chance to work with somebody who not only is a talented scorer, but excellent. I'd say easily the best passer in the WNBA game today. But I don't know, is she a real free agent? Like they were telling us Kelsey Mitchell was a free agent, or is there some stipulation that the Liberty can come in and snatch her and keep her for another year? I don't know.
I don't know either, but it is the time where these WNBA players are getting moved. There's been actually a couple big moves in the WNBA. I don't know how much you've been following along with this, but Alyssa Smith is going from the Connecticut Sun to the Phoenix team down there in Phoenix. I forget the name, the Mercury. So she's going to the Mercury, Alyssa Thomas is. And we saw Brittany Griner is going to Atlanta.
Well, there's been all kinds of changes, and I don't know if the Brittany Griner move to sign as a free agent in Atlanta was because Phoenix may have informed her that they were going a different direction.
Yeah.
What's her name? Is it Thomas?
Yep, Alyssa Thomas.
And so Alyssa Thomas is big-time player.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she's a 5-time All-Star and 3-time WNBA pick. And
Brittany Griner, I think she just kind of wore out her welcome. She'd been there a while. They weren't winning championships, and it's like at some point you got to say, you know what, we can't build around that player. They're not producing consistently enough. She was not much of a factor in the games that the Fever played against Phoenix last year. I can't remember if she missed one or if she was out there for both games, but
yeah,
I kind of understand that Phoenix has to kind of restructure a little bit.
Definitely.
To move forward. And, of course, the news from yesterday, Kelsey Plum, who's been a fixture in Las Vegas. She is now heading to Los Angeles, where she'll join forces with Cameron Brink. And you've got Jewel Lloyd.
Yep, going to Vegas.
Former Notre Dame Fighting Irish player. She is going to Las Vegas from Seattle. So, yeah, a lot of big names kind of shifting around in the league this year. 260-447-8500. Let's find out what else is happening in the world of sports before we get to Scott Agness. This is today's top headlines.
All right, well, we'll definitely talk about this with Scott. Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark wants her first three-point contest to come at the WNBA All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis and will not participate in a special challenge during the NBA All-Star Weekend, her representative said today. Veteran defensive coordinator Chris Ash has accepted the job as Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, sources told media today. Ash was the co-coordinator on Ohio State's national title team in 2014, coordinated the defense on 2 Big Ten title teams at Wisconsin, and also worked as the defensive coordinator at Arkansas in 2013 and Texas in 2020. He's replacing Al Golden, who is returning to the Cincinnati Bengals. And a member of Ohio State's football support staff, quality control coach Joe Lieberger, was placed on administrative leave in December because of a university investigation, according to a letter from the school's human resources department obtained by media today. Lieberger's attorney told media he is unclear of the accusations against his client. He also doesn't know how long the investigation will run, other than, quote, too long. And those are your top stories today.
So coming up this hour, Scott Agness joins us next. Dylan Sinn comes along at about 4:40. It's the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Women's basketball in action tonight on the road at Youngstown State, and that game available on ESPN Plus if you'd like to watch the women tonight. Kind of funny when we had the coaches show. Of course, we have little chats during commercial breaks, and it's almost seemed like Maria Marchesano was more excited about Thursday night than Wednesday and Friday, and the games are actually on Wednesday and Friday, but she was looking forward to the viewing party that they were going to have on the road on Thursday night, because Green Bay, Cleveland State, the women's basketball meeting, the first of 2 this year, is going to be at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And then the men taking on Cleveland State, top 2 teams in the Horizon League right now. And that game will be at 9 o'clock. So they got basically 4 hours blocked out to just enjoy their night off probably in Moon Township, Pennsylvania. And she was talking about looking forward to being able to kick back and watch those two games on Thursday night. We are joined now by Scott Agness from the Fieldhouse Files. And Scott, you've got to help me here. We're like learning as we go through the WNBA calendar exactly how things work. And now we've figured it out that this is the time for free agency. And I don't know where the Fever are exactly positioned, but they did check a big check mark off when they got Kelsey Mitchell re-signed. That's huge because that's really step one before you go out and try to figure out how to complement this roster.
Yeah, it was priority number one, and that was the primary focus that they were zeroed in on since the front office and new coach took over here. But by the way, you mentioned Maria Marchesano. I got to give her big props what she's doing there at Purdue Fort Wayne, winners of 13 in a row, undefeated. I worked with her for a year or two here at IU Indy several years ago, and she's just doing a tremendous job. But in terms of, again, a Fever free agency here, right now, this was the plan all along to core Kelsey Mitchell, which is much of your audience would be familiar of, like the franchise tag. And so the one thing the Fever stressed is they wanted to make sure that this was a two-way partnership. Just because they could core her and bring her back, you want to bring back an encouraging camper here, right? Someone that's all in on this. And so they wanted to meet with her in China while she was playing overseas, reached agreement on this Cord Supermax deal, which is worth $250,000, a one-year deal, Brett. And you're going to see primarily all one-year deals right now because the players opted out of the collective bargaining agreement after this upcoming season. So after this season, then things will reset. The rookie scale, the Supermax, all that probably will increase substantially, primarily due to that new TV deal that I think we've discussed at length in this program.
Yeah, because they don't know what the cap's going to be and what the salary structure will look like once everything settles down. But it does leave the question for 2025, what position are the Fever in? Because I keep trying to calculate, do they have cash to spend? Can they go buy one player, two players? Because it does look, and I think there's a couple of corresponding moves that are still coming. I'm not sure what's going on with Katie Lou Samuelson, if they've made any kind of information on that, or what's happening with Erica Wheeler. But where are the Fever right now? And specifically, what about those two players?
Yeah, so Erica Wheeler's a free agent. Katie Lou Samuelson is under contract for another season at, I think, roughly $150,000. She's a player that they had high hopes for, that was in the starting lineup to begin the year, but then she kind of faded out of the rotation. I'm very curious. We have not talked with head coach Stephanie White since her introductory press conference several months ago, or gotten more kind of since that time her in-depth opinion on, say, her, or is Nalissa Smith brought back? I don't think Nalissa liked how things ended here, and it kind of felt negative with an Instagram post that she posted at the end of the season, although she said in her exit interview, Brett, that, that was just kind of a season wrap-up. It wasn't necessarily a goodbye, so we'll see. But with Katie Lou Samuelson, I think ideally that would be a contract you'd offload. I think they're still certainly in the market for another max player out there. But what I can tell you, too, Brett, is this team is fully committed in being all in on winning now. They're not trying to acquire picks. They're not trying to, see what they look like in 2 years. They realize not only do they have this blessing of Caitlin Clark, but Caitlin's on a rookie deal. So much like a quarterback in his rookie deal in the NFL, you go all in right now because you're afforded this an impressive opportunity right now. So that's what they're doing.
I know there's a hard salary cap in the WNBA, and maybe that's unfortunate for the Fever because you would think they've got more cash coming in right now than any of the WNBA teams. But do you understand how some of the merchandising works and who actually gets that money? Because clearly the number 22 jersey for the Fever has brought in a ton of cash around the WNBA. Do they revenue share on jerseys? How does that work?
I'm not 100% on this, but my general understanding is that they keep most of the proceeds that come to the gift shop here locally, but there's a significant share in, if you're buying on WNBA Store or Fanatics, somewhere online. I'm sure Caitlin's or the Players Association gets a very tiny portion, and maybe that's something that they'll negotiate more out of in the collective bargaining agreement. But that one's not completely apparent. But what it is, by the way, is, Fever gear as a whole. And at one point in the summer, they announced midway through the year that I think gear was up like 300%. Beer sales was up 1,000%. Just the numbers are astronomical that you almost don't believe them. But then you remember it's Caitlin, so of course.
Yeah, and ticket sales, just tickets alone, are ridiculous. But, okay, what are targets? Do you have an idea? I mean, I keep, and it's probably me dreaming because I don't know her current contract situation. She's listed as a free agent, but that doesn't mean anything because there's this core rule, which I'd never heard of, but I do understand it now that I've had it explained to me. But Breanna Stewart, I think, is the perfect fit for this squad, but I'm not sure she's leaving New York.
Yeah, so she's one of those players that my understanding is cord there in New York, which means she can't necessarily leave freely. What you'll generally see is, like we've seen already, is Jewel Lloyd and Kelsey Plum, two former number one picks involved in a massive trade out west, or Brittany Griner, who was cored by Phoenix, wanting to move on and going to Atlanta here. So it would really have to facilitate a trade. Satu Sabali from down there in Dallas has made clear that she is not returning to Dallas, but the Wings cored her, so they're going to have to work with her on making a trade. That's someone I know a lot of fans would like to see here. What would you see someone like Stewie with the Fever? I doubt it. As much as intriguing as that is, I'd be surprised if they move on from what they've done there in New York with Sabrina and Stewie in particular. What we are seeing is a couple of teams that we've known for the last decade, with Connecticut, for example. Not only did Stephanie White and her coaching staff come here, but they've moved on. Alyssa Thomas was traded to, I believe, the Phoenix Mercury. Brittany Griner moved out of the Phoenix Mercury. We saw Diana Taurasi probably here retire. So Phoenix doesn't look at all the same here. So the Fever have some options. They have enough cap space to operate. Plus, they can move on from some players or try to swing deals. I think the biggest thing, Brett, we saw was some of those initial dominoes, that trade out west, Kelsey Mitchell agreeing to this core. Now the Fever have their foundational pieces, they're calling them, with Mitchell, with Boston, and with Clark. Now they can move forward with filling out the rest of the roster, which is primarily in terms of agility, in terms of depth, and in terms of adding some size on the front line.
What have been your thoughts about Unrivaled, the new women's league?
Yeah, so far, the challenge is the schedule, right? I mean, you're competing against the NFL and up until recently, college football playoffs, so that's a challenge. I generally like the idea, the options here. The challenge is I'm not sure, I don't care who's playing, I'm not sure I'm interested in watching 3-on-3 basketball. It's just a totally different game there. And the other thing is it just looks exhausting and tiring. They narrowed the middle of the floor, but they're playing essentially a full court game rather than kind of half court, run it back like we saw with the big three. So I'm one that's open to it and wants to give it a chance here. It's just so different than what we're used to being non-standard basketball here. But you do have enough of the big names that it's going to draw eyes. Although I will say, just based on my Twitter timeline, there's been more interest in what TGL and Tiger Woods and Rory are doing than there are in Unrivaled after week one.
Although the full court version of the 3-on-3 does give Angel Reese more space to be able to miss layups.
Man, I've had a lot of Fever fans send me videos of her bricking a three-pointer, and here he goes for three. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it does give her more space. You're right.
All right, Scott, we got to talk about the Pacers, their return from Europe. I've been asking my listeners what's worse, going to or coming back from Europe, dealing with jet lag or trying to get back on schedule. Everybody has said it's worse coming back. What have the Pacers done? Anything special to get prepared for being back here in the States and starting things up again tonight?
Yeah, so that's interesting because I was on that trip separately from them, and so far I would argue going out there was much worse. I think I'm better. I've been home for 2 days. They've been home for 3, and I've gotten right back into it. I think my sleep's much better off right now. Actually, I'm sleeping better than I did before going out there because you got to remember they're 6 hours ahead there in Europe, so the challenge is when we go to bed. When I went to bed, for example, on my final night, that final NFL game, what was it? Buffalo, Kansas City hasn't even kicked off yet. So I missed that entire game, unfortunately. Wow. But I think coming back here has been much easier thus far. They took an entire day off on Monday after flying home. And so I think they'll be doing well. They've only played 2 games here in about 10 days. And so the interesting thing, though, is you play a conference and division opponent, and the Pistons shouldn't need any kind of motivation or firing up given the physical and physicality and the tensions the last time these two teams met. The only concern going into this one, Brett, is that Andrew Nembhard was added to the injury report yesterday with a back injury. I almost wonder, we saw him screening a lot, taking a lot of hits from Wemby in that last game in Paris. Wonder if he maybe took one too many or landed hard there. Otherwise, this team is in good health standing outside of the 2 bigs with the Achilles injury.
Is it speculation or is there some truth behind the rumors or reports? It depends on how you identify it when you see it on Twitter. But Miles Turner, potential trade, what are you hearing? What do you believe?
I believe those are all rumors right now, noticeably coming from across the country. It feels like outside of last year, Miles has been connected to the Lakers like every year for 4 years in a row, and he's been in trade speculation for the last 5-6 years. I don't know where this latest thing came about, other than the consideration here. That's just common sense. That what are the Pacers going to do with the center spot moving forward? And right now they're up against the luxury tax. They've had good management this year, up to within $100,000 of the luxury tax, but not in it. And it's something they're going to have to be willing to pay once they have a contending roster. They don't right now, so it'd be foolish. The challenge is you have Tyrese on a super max deal. You have Pascal Siakam on a max deal right now. You just paid Andrew Nembhard, whose new deal kicks in. Benedict Matherin's going to be a new deal. Essentially what I'm saying is now that it's come due for all these players to get paid. About half of them did last offseason, from T.J. McConnell, Obi Toppin, Nembhard, etc. So you're looking around this Pacers roster and you're seeing, where's all this money going to come from? Is Miles the odd man out? I think everything changed, though, there that first 10 days of the season when not just James Wiseman, but Isaiah Jackson also suffered an Achilles tendon tear. Jackson, coming off the final year of his rookie deal, is going to need a new deal here. So you're settling with one center. The challenges the Pacers have is bird rights. It's how much are they willing to go into the luxury tax next season, or, that said, are you willing to offload maybe a couple of these contracts to make room for him? All that, I believe, has led to the rumors, not substantive conversation.
Scott, I've got to ask you, too, nationally in the NBA, and I'm always fascinated by this, guys like James Harden, Paul George, guys who really haven't won anything, and sometimes I think their character is questioned. Not that they're bad people, but that they just aren't guys that are going to lead you to championships. Kevin Durant in a little bit of that same type of category, but now you've got Jimmy Butler, and I cannot believe the market that seems to be out there for Jimmy Butler with all of his crazy, and that's the best word I can use, crazy behavior that he's displayed so far this year with an organization that to me is one of the best in the NBA as far as the way it operates and is run. And it's just been a joke. And yet I'm hearing reports there's 5 or 6 teams lined up. And I don't know if that's an agent trying to get that out or if that's truth. But it just baffles me that there's that much demand for a guy like Jimmy Butler.
I think that's a lot of created conversation there, because the reality is, look, the team that acquires him is going to have to give him a new contract. They've got to be willing to tolerate some of this behavior. Now, a lot of it also is exaggerated behavior to get his way out. We've seen him do this before in Chicago and Minnesota. I think he wanted to stay in Philly, and that was a bad decision by the 76ers to choose Tobias Harris over him. But now he's in Miami. He wanted a new extension. Miami's not willing to give him the years and give him all that time, given where they currently stand in their roster and everything. They don't want to hamper their flexibility here in a couple of years. He's already 35. No, he has not won anything, but in the playoffs, you'd certainly like him on your side. You're seeing a guy like him really try to push to a destination. For some reason, he wants to go to Phoenix and team up there with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, where, again, you just have a top-heavy roster where you're seeing more and more. You do need talent. You needed a couple max contracts, but much like the Pacers, you also need depth. We saw that with the Boston Celtics, for example, in this most recent year. So I only think there's probably a couple teams seriously interested. It's got to be contending teams, and it's got to be teams that have some flexibility to make a trade. The challenge, and we don't need to go into all of this, but the new collective bargaining agreement that started a couple of years ago has severely hamstrung the teams that traditionally are winning and spending big money. You think in the Golden State Warriors, for example, because every dollar that they spend is like times 5 based on the penalties and payments that they have to make. Think of the Clippers as well.
Scott, you got some breaking news you're going to have to cover because we just learned that Benedict Mathurin is listed now as questionable tonight. He's got an illness, so that could be another name that's out of the lineup for the Pacers tonight. We'll have to see, and we'll follow you online and, of course, at the fieldhousefiles.com to keep up with that story. But always appreciate it, man. Great stuff. Appreciate you jumping on with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep,
appreciate
that is Scott Agness joining us here on the Sports Rush. He's got the Fieldhouse Files. If you like to follow the Pacers and the Fever, he keeps you up to date almost every day, has stories or columns about either what's happening on the court or behind the scenes with the Indiana basketball teams. Okay, we'll take a break. We got to come back and talk, well, the state of Indiana college basketball, because it's the rivalry with the Indiana Hoosiers visiting the Purdue Boilermakers coming up this Friday. And we'll find out what Dylan Sinn expects from this game when he joins us next, right here on the Sports Rush, 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Coming up in hour number 2, it is D.C. Hendricks. Yes, the former producer of the Sports Rush, who is now covering the WWE, to give us all the details of what to look forward to with Royal Rumble. Still don't have the echo. Okay, we'll work on that. We'll put in a request to engineering. Royal Rumble in Indianapolis coming up this weekend. All right, let's talk to our next guest. Joining us from the Journal Gazette, and he's waited 24 hours to be able to jump on the show, and we apologize for that. It is Dylan Sinn, and Dylan, how's your Wednesday going?
It's good. I'm excited to be on with you, even though I was left waiting. I sat by my phone for the entire night and all of this morning waiting for a call.
Oh, come on. We told you. We gave you word, and we apologized. We had no control over it. Technical issue that came up right when you were scheduled. So I thought, Dylan must have decided that tomorrow works better in his schedule. He'll just sabotage the radio station for the next 15 minutes. But we figured it out, and so I'm glad you had a chance to jump on today. Part of that is probably because Indiana and Purdue play each other, and they don't play till Friday. So it kind of slows the pace down for you a little bit this week, perhaps. But let's talk about Indiana. And it's such a fun topic to dive into right now and what the Hoosiers are doing. Obviously, you've been able to look at what happened late in the game against Maryland. To me, it's inexcusable. You're this far into the season. If it was game 1, game 2, I could say, all right, some guys maybe just haven't gotten on the same page. But we're 20-some games into the season. I don't care what 5 guys you put on the floor. They ought to know how to execute an inbound play.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. We're not at the point in the season anymore where you can say, well, it's early, right? We're halfway through the Big Ten season. And it wasn't just the very last play. They didn't execute the previous the defensive play either, when the idea was you're going to foul up 2 because you have a foul to give if they get an open look, and they didn't do that either. So it was back-to-back miscues on the offensive and defensive end, and then on top of that, Trey Galloway missing the front end of a 1-on-1 when Miles Rice had the ball and he passed it away to Trey Galloway, who's a much worse free throw shooter. So really it was an entire kind of just meltdown at the end of that game, a game that they played pretty well in the second half to give themselves a chance to win. So you can find the silver lining if you want to say, hey, that was a pretty good second half overall, but really it is swamped by how they played at the end of that game.
And it's easy to point out that final play, but this is starting to become a little bit of a pattern. Indiana maybe doesn't show up, or they don't finish a game, or there's lack of execution. There's multiple things you can point out over the last couple of weeks that Indiana's fallen short, and the arrow is clearly pointed in Mike Woodson's direction. Is that fair, the criticism of Mike Woodson with where the Hoosiers are at right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think this team is more talented than it has put on the court, than the product that has been put on the court this season. And eventually that has to come down on the coach, right? I think this is the fourth year of your tenure. There are coaches who are in their first year who have turned programs around. We've seen seeing it happen at Louisville right now with a brand new roster. Kentucky is playing well with a brand new roster. And so the idea of not being able to put it together in year 4 with the level of talent on this roster just isn't going to get it done, I think is fair to say. Now, there's still some basketball left. Only halfway through the Big Ten season, they could turn it around to some extent, but you have to wonder what it's going to take in those last 10 games to convince the decision makers in Indiana to not make the decision that seems likely to be coming right now.
It's interesting because you've been sitting there and you've been watching most of these games in person, and I think one of the accusations of Mike Woodson is, and he's willingly come out and stated that he just doesn't know. He doesn't have the answer. It just got to get back to work and get better. And we've been hearing that now for a while. That's very concerning to me. That, in fact, is the worst part of all of this, is that the head coach should have the answers. If he doesn't, who will? And I guess I'll ask the the journalist, what answers do you see? What's Indiana have to do that they've not done well to turn this around?
I think that's kind of the problem in a nutshell, is that it's really hard to find answers, right? Like, that's the thing, is this team has played well together for stretches. It's just that they also have stretches where their offense just completely disappears and they kind of just go into a rut. I think if you want to point to one thing, it's communication on the defensive end. They just don't seem to be on the same page a lot of times, especially recently. And that's why they're giving up a lot of open threes in these last couple of games. I believe it's 55 three-pointers that opponents have made in the last 5 games against Indiana, 42% shooting from three-point range in those games. So it's just not – they're missing rotations. They're not communicating on switches. Every time a guy sets a screen against Indiana guard, you hold your breath, and it's like, are they going to execute this correctly? And they do it correctly often enough that you wonder why it doesn't happen more often. But more often than that, we're seeing guys pointing at each other and saying, you were supposed to be here, you were supposed to be there, and you just can't be having that at this time of the season. It should be more of a well-oiled machine than it is.
You know, it's kind of interesting to me to look at the difference between this Purdue program and Indiana. And, you know, Purdue got embarrassed a bit with that loss to Ohio State. They completely gave one away in the second half and lost to the Buckeyes after the Hoosiers, surprisingly, had beaten Ohio State on the road. How did Purdue respond? They came back out and just blew the doors off Michigan. And that's not necessarily the response we've seen from the Hoosiers when they've been embarrassed. But where's Purdue at right now? We've seen kind of both sides of what there potentially can be and what they also can potentially be. I mean, they're good, they're bad, they're in between, but I think overall it's great to see Caleb First being a productive piece to what Purdue is building there on this season. And I think Matt Painter has it figured out. But your thoughts on the Boilermakers right now?
Yeah, I think they've improved immensely since December, or even November. It really is impressive, especially on the defensive end, how much better they've gotten. They really couldn't stop anybody earlier in the season. This is a team that gave up 84 points at home against Yale in November, and Matt Painter was kind of sounding the alarm, like, we're not guarding anybody right now. And outside of that second half against Ohio State, where it seemed like they just had some tired legs after their trip west, they've really been good on the defensive end. Braden Smith has been terrific at being kind of that free safety where he just gets in passing lanes and gets steals going the other way. Caleb First, I think, has been a big part of that defensive resurgence where he allows them to switch a lot, almost every single screen, because he can guard perimeter players and stay in front without being embarrassed. I think that's a huge piece of what they're doing. They settled on him in the starting lineup, and that's been huge. So what they did against Michigan was blitz those point guards, blitz those Michigan guards, get steals, get out in transition, and just overwhelm Michigan from the start. I think they're going to try to do the same thing against Indiana. We've seen Miles Rice and Trey Galloway and Kanan Carlisle get turnover prone this year. I would not be surprised to see Purdue really put the pressure on and see if Indiana folds underneath it.
Dylan, I got a question. Of course, we talked to Justin Cohn, who's left the paper, and his beat responsibilities with Fort Wayne Komets, and I think I actually saw your name attached to either a Komet tweet or Komet article. But what? I mean, how can you fit something more on your plate? You know, you already went through the line and filled your first plate. How are you filling another?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we have to do at the Journal Gazette right now, because Justin was such a huge part of what we do. I mean, the Komets beat is a huge one for us, the JG. So we're all pitching in until we can get someone new permanently into that space. I will be at the Komets game on Saturday against Wheeling at the Coliseum. I've never covered a Komets game before, so I'm really excited to do that and kind of step into Justin's shoes. I know that's a tall task for me to equal or even come close to what he's done over the years, but that's the goal, is to maintain that same high standard, and I'm going to do everything I can. So big weekend coming up between Indiana, Purdue, and Komets on Saturday.
Yep, should be a big weekend, and look forward to your coverage as you'll be at Mackey Arena Friday night for the Indiana Hoosiers and Purdue Boilermakers. Dylan, always appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Absolutely, Brett. Thanks for having me on, as always.
That is Dylan Sinn from the Journal Gazette. So now we've got to go through. He covers Notre Dame football, IU basketball, IU football, Purdue basketball, high school sports, and now you can, the Tin Caps during the summer. Yep. He's there almost every night covering Tin Caps baseball. Now we can add Fort Wayne Komet coverage with Dylan Sinn.
Very cool, and we do appreciate the coverage he provides for the Journal Gazette.
I'll tell you this, though, what we've got to do, he's got to have a blog, and it's got to be called The Sin Bin. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's good. That's good for hockey, yeah.
That's a pretty good one.
I do like that.
The Sin Bin. And he can give us like a little update on all things happening with the Komets once a week. There you go, Dylan.
Free idea.
Free idea. Just passed along just because you're a nice guest on our show. We'll give you all the best ideas. 260-447-8500, the Parkview Sports Medicine text line, 260-447-8500. Still coming up on the show. In hour number 2, we'll talk to D.C. Hendricks. Big-time event, and it's finally coming to a state near you. It's Royal Rumble coming into Indianapolis this weekend. Do you have your tickets? Do you plan on going? Well, D.C. Hendricks will be there as he now covers the WWE, among other things. DC's one of those guys like Dylan's got 8 jobs.
Yeah, he's, dipping his hands into a lot of pots, but he does a great job of covering everything he does. So we're looking forward to DC in hour 2.
But he guaranteed me that I would not look as dumb as I probably am when we talk wrestling. He said, I'll make you look smart.
Oh, that's a tough task, but we'll see if he can manage.
that is going to be a tough. I used to follow wrestling because my son got real into it when he was like 8 years old.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And so it was something an activity we could share together. And so I would watch. He would explain to me all the different characters and who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who do we need. And then when the WWE came to town at the Coliseum, I got us tickets. We were right up front. We got autographs. And then I was fortunate enough while I was working here to have a chance to get a backstage pass. And I took him back. And, of course, they send a couple of the guys that aren't the big top superstars, but they're guys you've seen on TV. He got a chance to get some photos and autographs, and that just absolutely thrilled him. But I was following the sport pretty closely because every week there's 2 or 3 nights where it's all about WWE, and so we would sit together and watch it, and he'd explain it to me, and I'd understand it, and then he moved to Florida.
Yeah.
And also I picked up the Purdue-Fort Wayne play-by-play, and so it's been 10, 12 years since I've really, really followed it. I mean, I will still turn it on every once in a while, but DC's going to have to do some work to make me look like a smart man when it comes to wrestling.
Yeah, we'll see if he can live up to that tough task here in the second hour. But, yeah.
I hope he'll accept the challenge because he's going to be joining us coming up at 5:20. And, of course, once again, the Parkview Sports Medicine text line, 260-447-8500 if you've got any questions, comments, or suggestions to add to the show. It is the Sports Rush. We get set to take you home and over the hump next on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM.